Our last video, we talked about how Father, Son, and Spirit do not divide the Godhead into three gods because they share the same ousia. They share the same divine essence in a general sense. With this video, we're going to talk about how Father, Son, and Spirit each are discrete, unique beings. Not three separate gods, not three masks or modes of the same God, but each is nonetheless a unique communication of the divine essence. And moreover, not only do they not divide the Godhead, paradoxically they reinforce the unity of the Godhead. And the way we go about explaining this theologically is by using this term, hypostasis. I prefer this instead of person for reasons I'll give in a couple of minutes. So, hypostasis means divine essence in a specific sense. So the Father is a hypostasis, a unique communication of the divine essence. So the Father uniquely communicates the divine essence by creating everything out of nothing. The Son is another hypostasis, another unique communication of the divine essence, and uniquely does so by being the Son sent by the Father to fulfill this mission of redemption, beginning with the fact that he is a God-man, a divine person with a fully assumed human nature, signaling God's acceptance of us where we are, despite our sin, and performing a mission which redeems us, which removes our sin, and unites us, reconciles us to God the Father. The Holy Spirit is yet a third, another unique hypostasis, another unique communication of the divine essence. The Holy Spirit is the abiding, continuing presence of God in the church and the world, which continues today. Now, keep in mind, every time you see one of the persons of the Trinity, you see all three present. God is fully present, even though we, in our limited perspectives, think that we're encountering just one of the persons of the Trinity. God is fully present. Now, to better understand hypostasis, it may be a good idea to remove hypostasis from its theological context and put it in day-to-day existence. So let's go back to the pen example. In the last video, we talked about how all pens share the same ousia of penness, an ink of some kind encased in a protective casing, dispensed by a point of some kind, protected by some kind of covering. Now, this is one unique communication, one unique hypostasis of pen. It's dry erase ink in a plastic casing with a removable cap and a felt tip with a chiseled, angled end. One hypostasis of pen. Here is another hypostasis of penness, another unique communication of pen. This one protects its tip by having a retractable tip. The tip itself is ballpoint. The ink is not dry erase ink, the ink is permanent ink. If I write this on a piece of paper, it tends to stay put. And the casing, though plastic like the other pen, is a different configuration of casing with a rubber handle which helps me grip the pen. And there are other hypostases, other communications of penness. So you have pens which have a metal casing. You have pens which are fountain pens, where you have to dip it in an inkwell to write. All of you have motor vehicles. They share the same general essence of motor vehicle-ness. Internal combustion engine with power transmitted to a drivetrain, then transmitted to tires, and there is an enclosure of some kind to protect you, your passengers, and your goods. But each of your vehicles are unique communications of motor vehicle-ness. Some of you own cars, some of you own trucks. Your cars are of different shapes and sizes. Your trucks are of different shapes and sizes. Your cars and your trucks are different makes and models, different manufacturers, different styling cues, different sets of features, different communications, in other words, of those things that make up motor vehicleness. In other words, each of your vehicles is a unique communication, a unique hypostasis of motor vehicleness. Now, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit each are unique communications of the divine essence. And yet hypostasis also shows that the Godhead is not divided. It reinforces its unity. How? Because if the Church Fathers had wanted to talk about Father, Son, and Spirit as isolated individuals, they would have used this term, prosopon, which means an isolated individual, but they did not. They used hypostasis because a hypostasis not only defines a person, or in this case, a specific communication of the divine essence, not simply by one's particular qualities, but also through one's relationships. To better understand this, let's take hypostasis out of the theological context and use it in day-to-day life. So, was your mom and dad always your mom and dad? No. They became your mom and dad when they had their firstborn child. If you are the eldest sibling, were you always the big brother or the big sister? No. You became the big brother or the big sister when your sibling was born. In my case, my brother Tomas, who was born 3 years after me. Was your mom and dad always husband and wife? No. They became husband and wife the day they got married. Is the Arizona Cardinals football team much of a football team without the rest of the NFL to play against? No. The Arizona Cardinals, to be a bona fide football team, they need other teams of roughly equal caliber to compete against in a league under the same rules. Arizona State University. Can it be Arizona State University with just one college? No. It takes multiple colleges to make up a university. Benedictine University is a university because we have multiple colleges and campuses across the United States, and we are in the third one that we hope to grow. So as you can see from examples from day-to-day life, a hypostasis is not just defined by one's individual qualities. You are defined, or another hypostasis is defined by its relationships. Who you are is not simply defined by your individual qualities. Who you are is as much defined by your relationships with others. So, back to God. The Father cannot be the Father without the Son. The Son cannot be the Son without the Father to send the Son. The Spirit cannot be the Spirit without the Father and the Son sending the Spirit. And the Father needs the Spirit to attest to the Father. The Son needs the Spirit to attest to the Son. To put it in a more general sense, each loves the other. I do not want to reduce these hypostatic relationships to just functions. That's a danger that one must avoid. But you do have the Father sending the Son and empowering the Son, the Holy Spirit attesting to and empowering the Son sending the Spirit, attesting to the Father, the Spirit attesting to the Father and the Son. You see what I mean. Each loves the other. Each has a relationship to the other. You really cannot understand one without the relationship of the others. To fully understand the Father, you must understand the Father's relationship to the Son and the Spirit. To fully understand the Son, you must fully understand the relationship between the Son and the Father, and the Son and the Spirit. To fully understand the Holy Spirit, you need to understand the relationship of the Spirit vis-a-vis the Father and the Son. These bonds of love, these bonds of peace, and these relationships unite the Godhead. Remember, the Church Fathers, if they wanted to say that Father, Son, and Spirit were three separate gods, they would have used the term prosopon. They did not. They used the term hypostasis. because these divine, specific communications of the divine essence in a specific sense are not to be understood alone through their individual qualities. They are to be understood each in relationship to the other. So, this takes us to our next term, our last term, in terms of understanding the Trinity. The term is Perichoresis, which is a Greek term which means dance. This is the bond of love, the bond of peace, shared by the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, where their differences do not undermine the Godhead, they don't divide the Godhead, they reinforce and sustain God's unity. St. Augustine points out in his book De Trinitate that God models in his very being how we ought to live as church. As the diversity of persons reinforce and do not undermine the unity of God, so too our diversity as the people of God. All of the different cultural instantiations, all the different cultural means by which we communicate and live out the same one faith, the same one ethical life, the same goal of theosis. That in doing so, we develop a bond of peace as a metaphor for this bond of peace that exists amongst Father, Son, and Spirit. That we truly live out what Paul says in his letter to the Galatians, that we are neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, we are all one in Jesus Christ. In other words, our differences do not undermine the unity of the church. Our differences help us become one in Jesus Christ. As Americans, as Africans, Asians, Europeans, all the languages of the earth, all of our cultural instantiations of being, and so on. St. Augustine points out in his book De Trinitate that God models in his very being how we ought to live as church. As the diversity of persons reinforce and do not undermine the unity of God, so too our diversity as the people of God. All of the different cultural instantiations, all the different cultural means by which we communicate and live out the same one faith, the same one ethical life, the same goal of theosis. That in doing so, we develop a bond of peace as a metaphor for this bond of peace that exists amongst Father, Son, and Spirit. That we truly live out what Paul says in his letter to the Galatians, that we are neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, we are all one in Jesus Christ. In other words, our differences do not undermine the unity of the church. Our differences help us become one in Jesus Christ. As Americans, as Africans, Asians, Europeans, all the languages of the earth, all of our cultural instantiations of being, and so on.